I think what, if you would like to, I think what I'll do is I'll have Katie go back and rewatch. It's just a little. All right, so I'd like to welcome everyone to the December 28th, 2023 meeting of the Advisory Committee on Racial Equity, Inclusion, and Human Rights.
I think what, if you would like to. All right. So I'd like to get
They have a microphone right there.
2023 meeting of the Advisory Committee on Racial Equity, Inclusion, and Human Rights. I think what, if you would like to.
I think the problem was I still had the live stream
You
running
did
in the
the
back.
echo, for sure.
First day.
Just for, just making sure we have it for notes, we will start by, getting everyone's name. Hannah Fellis, Chair. Most of the calls member. Evelyn Roscoe. Welcome.
Andre Chassé,
I'm Debbie Laurie.
Laurent Lerlo, and Jason Cannon.
Great, thank you. And I don't think, do we have any way to know if there's anyone out there or no?
I can see participants. It's just us.
Okay, sounds good. So first up on our agenda is the approval of minutes. We need to do two, September 26th and November 28th. Can I get a motion on meeting minutes?
Move to approve.
Second that motion. All right. Is there any changes or anything that we need to make to the minutes that you may have seen that were provided in your packets, or any questions? Neville, you did receive the meeting minutes and all that.
I have the agenda for tonight.
Mhm.
And then this.
Yeah, the agenda document probably has the minutes included.
Oh, yes.
Give everyone just another minute, just because there are 2 months worth that we need to review.
Like a very small thing, but just the word TANF was misspelled in the November minutes. It's not that big of a deal, but TANF is TANF. Well, I have to.
Seeing no other discussion, we will approve those minutes, making the change to the word TANF on the November meeting minutes. Thank you, everyone.
Is that a change to my name?
No,
Oh.
sorry, that's a good question, because TANF, I see. In the November minutes on the first page, they talk about, someone did the acronym for TANF, which is Temporary Assistance for Needy Families, and it's
Oh.
called TANIF.
Okay, well, my name is two N's. Just,
Okay. All right, we will make sure those meeting minutes do get updated.
Not five. We're supposed to go.
Come on in.
Hi, everybody.
Sit wherever. Once you take a seat, we'll just have you go ahead and introduce yourselves. We did just do the approval of the meeting minutes. Awesome.
And is it Jason with two N's or Kenneth with two N's?
Canif with two N's.
Okay.
Nancy two N's.
Okay.
Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yes, hello, my name is Gabrielle and meeting member. Wiley is my last name. Hi.
Hi, I'm Rebecca Jones. I'm the college student representative.
Fabulous, thank you. And just like, you know, we did approve the meeting minutes with two changes to the November meeting minutes, to a misspelling of TANF and to Jason's last name as well. So we will make those corrections to the minutes. Moving on to item number 2 under education, we were supposed to have an update from the school, the EIB committee, but we did receive an email from Dana indicating that she was unable to make it. I'm not sure if there was anything that you felt that you wanted to share.
She has the insight, and
Okay. We will work on getting that on the next
Yeah.
agenda as
I would say, Evelyn, are you a member of the school's DEIB committee? And maybe Evelyn may have something you want to share about the work they're doing. And if not, that's okay too. We'll get it updated. No pressure.
Yeah.
This isn't like the first minute.
Yeah.
Put me on the spot.
if you don't have anything to share, we'll go on to the other item. Okay, all right. And
Did I introduce myself?
you have the meeting, the Catholic Charities, right? No,
What?
I
No,
was
it's
right.
right.
I'm like,
It's Melissa.
that is Melissa. We weren't sure if you wanted to, where last time
Yes.
you were unable to make it.
Yeah.
We did get a brief update from the Maine Multicultural Center, but we didn't know if you still wanted to provide a little more context about, some of the changes that are happening, what might be coming in the future.
Sure, yeah, I think it was really good that, Pam, I think it was Pam that was presenting last week, or last month, and I'm sorry I wasn't unable to make it. Because our work really goes hand in hand with each other. So I work for Catholic Charities of Maine in the Refugee and Immigration Services Program, one of 22 programs within Catholic Charities. There's a wide range of programs from dentistry to, services for older adults to work with refugees and a lot in between. As a refugee resettlement site, there's 3 of us in the entire state of Maine. Catholic Charities of Maine is the largest and oldest one. And for our context in Bangor, the only one in Bangor. Our site opened last year in October, so October 2022, where we received 50 individuals arriving as refugees into Bangor. Important notation for all this is always what any presentation I do is kind of describing a bit what a refugee is, because often those words are used interchangeably. If you think of like the immigrant umbrella, refugee is just part of that. Specifically those who fled their countries because fear of persecution appear based on like 5 different statuses to their identity, whether that's like political affiliation, social identity, a wide variety, but that's why they arrive here. So this upcoming year, our numbers of what we anticipate to receive in Bangor is going to be doubling, with 100 individuals. We're kicking off the year strong with about 1/3 of our arrivals arriving within the first couple of months, which should be fun. So what can we do at Catholic Charities? There's 3 main enrollments people can be, they are part of. They're part of the medical screening, which is making sure that their vaccinations are up to date. They arrive going through intensive vaccination, but just like doing medical screening, connecting them to PCP. They also do employment services, so preparing people for jobs, trainings, ESL courses, and all courses, things like that. And also just general case management, which is connecting them to apply for Social Security cards, apply for benefits that they're eligible for, providing housing, or finding housing, providing furnishing. The furnishing is a lot with what the New Multicultural Center does. They help tremendously with furnishing apartments and houses for families when they arrive. And just any other kind of like cultural orientation pieces. It's kind of what we do. We work a lot with Maine Multicultural Center. They do, like I said, they do furnishing for the houses when refugees arrive. And they also provide like a welcome team, or what they call welcoming immigrant neighbors, the WIN team, which just helps provide additional pieces beyond case management. I kind of, as case managers, we have kind of the bare minimum, not the bare minimum, but very essentials that we have to do. They can provide just kind of another piece as a cultural navigator and helping families on their path to self-sufficiency. Do you guys have any questions? That's my synopsis, I guess, and it probably goes, I'm sure Pam talked a lot more in depthly, but that's what we do. We work with very specific categories at Catholic Charities Maine, not just at Catholic Charities Maine, but as a refugee resettlement site. We work with refugees, but we also work with other populations that are deemed eligible by the Office of Refugee Resettlement, which is at the federal level. Those could be seen as people who were approved of asylum status, not that applied for asylum status, but were approved. That could be recently, like the Ukrainian humanitarian parolees was one of our biggest populations. Cuban Haitians are also eligible for our programs. It changes the eligibility, but those are probably some examples that you maybe know of. With refugees too, they're eligible to work as soon as they get off the plane. They're kind of approved by the government to come to the US. They go through multiple background checks through different federal agencies, which makes them the most background check people in the US. Often there is confusion with refugees versus asylum seekers. Best way to think about it is the same status, but just different paths of how they got to the US. Refugees, it's kind of in terms of means and ability to go to a different country to claim refugee status, or have to claim refugee status while you're, or asylum status while in the US. Same people, but just a different status, which means completely different services for them. my synopsis. Do you guys have any questions for me?
Thank you for all your work.
Thank you.
So, I know that either yesterday or today, I did receive the email from the main multicultural center saying they have a large contingency coming through. Is that the same population that you're referring to, that third
Yes,
of what can come in?
and that's a really good question. So with the Maine Multicultural Center, kind of similar to what's, people we can serve, the Maine Multicultural Center is kind of that bigger umbrella. They can serve any immigrant coming into the area, whether that's a professional person coming in working a professional job, if it's a refugee, it's an asylum seeker, they can serve whoever, and just based on their organization, where we have very more specific guidelines or responsibilities of who we can serve. So with that, that's a family of ours that are coming in, because with a lot of the refugee families, we know ahead of time. We don't know a lot ahead of time. I would like for us to know more ahead of time, but we usually get about 2 to 3 weeks before we have an arrival. And so that's kind of what they're preparing for. So
Would there be, does Catholic Charities have its own listserv letting people know, or do you guys filter the need through the main multicultural center?
a really good question. We filter the need through the Maine Multicultural Center.
Mhm.
It's operated differently at different sites. Some, in Portland, for instance, I think they might have their own kind of volunteers, but for us, all of our volunteers are Maine Multicultural Center volunteers
Mhm.
that we work through. They've been a huge collaborator through all of this. Really helping with like the call to action of getting supplies and furnishings for families before they arrive.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So this is a question just out of curiosity. Catholic Charities, I mean, what is the relationship between Catholic Charities and the actual Catholic Church and the diocese, like the Diocese of Portland, or is it a completely separate entity from the diocese and the church, or,
It's
you
a
know, what is the relationship there?
That's a really good question. And I'm gonna just preface my answer as just my assumption and not actual fact.
Okay.
Before I take it, I'm quite sure that they're separate entities. We have a huge collaboration. We work with the parish in town. We work with them a lot. They've created a great partnership at the Attic, the thrift store, where we can
Right.
help families get clothing when they arrive and don't have a lot of means to do so. Great collaboration with them, but it's a separate entity from the Catholic Church. I'm not sure of the answer, actually. I don't want to say something
Yeah, the
incorrect.
reason for my question
Yeah.
really is because when people talk about a Catholic organization, they think, okay, well, this is a Christian religious organization. And my assumption is that this organization is non-sectarian and doesn't, proselytize or, doesn't preach or, try to encourage people, the refugees, to become Catholics or that kind of thing.
I appreciate that question. Then yes. Correct. We serve people of all faith backgrounds. We're not prophesizing or trying to have people
Convert people.
convert people at all. That would be ethically incorrect and just against kind of our code. Like we serve all people no matter what, and it's not it's just similar to any refugee or settlement site in the US. A lot of them are based on like a Catholic root of where they come from. It's not a part of it. It's separate in that way. It's not, I don't know if that was a good answer, but that's correct. It was a good question that I think, they might have some people confused.
Can I ask a follow-up on that?
Of course you can.
So I think the flip side of that is that do you find that Catholic Charities, that word Catholic combined with charities, and maybe the way that you're suggesting, do you find that causes obstacles to getting the work done, right? So like that the people who would receive that which we do would be resistant to that because of
The association with the Catholic Church, yeah.
I think it kind of can go both ways, honestly. Some people might hear the word Catholic Charities and that might give them a positive reaction, or some that might not give a positive reaction, depending on who that person is.
And we're having sort of, I'm also on the board at the Columbia Street Project, and we have sort of the same exact thing. And there's like 10 different service lines that we have there, but then the folks who would receive those, there's a lot of, let's say, sedimented religious-based trauma in the community, particularly around LGBTQ communities. And then so that's something that we're working with sort of downtown. I'm just curious if that extended over into sort of Catholic as well?
I can only answer, I guess, with clients, and I'm not sure of the community field, but with a lot of our clients, when they arrive, I've never had an experience where someone was expecting that I was doing things only because it was through Catholicism or anything beyond just being a refugee or settlement agency. And part of being a refugee, that can include LGBTQ status, and we also serve across the state, have LGBTQ folks that we work with, and it's a lot of them too, some of them with religious trauma, some are just based on the country and the trauma, maybe laws that are religious or non-religious, but I haven't experienced that with any of our clients. And usually, kind of when we go through our program agreement, a really key part that I always like really make sure everyone knows is just kind of, we are obligated and expected to respect every part of anyone's identity in any aspect. It's something I always iterate, because sometimes we might hear like, okay, you're respected beyond, sexual orientation, gender identity, expression, race, ethnicity, but I'm like, really, like, this is a key part of what we do, and also just kind of how I have to approach that too, because I'm serving people that mostly aren't, I don't think anyone is Catholic. And so that's kind of, I guess, a way that we ensure that with our clients.
It's really encouraging to hear. Thank you.
Yeah.
When they are coming to our country and they arrive, do they know prior to getting here that they're working with your organization, or they just know there's organizations they're working with?
A really good question.
I'm assuming it's a very fast process.
It's a fast process, but also there's like a lot of different moving parts. And in the brief way I can explain it, you leave your country, you seek refuge as like let's say a secondary country. You go through multiple agencies, like I think 4 to 6 agencies at the federal level. Then you're contacted with a voluntary agency at the federal level. There's 9 of them. We have one. Like every refugee resettlement agency has a voluntary agency at the federal level, and then they get it to us. I'm not sure at what point along that journey that they're kind of informed which agency it is, or whether if they are informed which agency that is. We get, because how our guidance work, we get all of our guidance from the government, although it's sometimes confusing because it's a nonprofit organization. You think of Catholic Charities, you don't always think of it as like, maybe you do, I don't know, but I wouldn't have thought of it always as like being connected with the federal government in such a strong way, but that's where like the contract and the funding is, yeah. So usually a lot of people knowing that they're coming to Bangor, I can speak of Bangor specifically, maybe not Catholic Charities, it's like very not, they don't have a lot of time when they know they're coming to Bangor. They're like, where is Bangor? Where is Maine? Someone thought they're going to Michigan when they arrived here. I guess maybe they're similar, but a lot of people don't have a lot, like we have, we work with some people, other clients that didn't know they're coming here until a couple weeks before. So I think that part is new. I'm not sure if it's relevant, if they know about it, if they care to know about it, because it's still.
Part of the reason why I asked that is because you have noted you're working under a federal contract, and that contract probably is giving you part of your guidance in the language that you're using with the refugees when they come here. So I suspect regardless of, I don't want to ignore that part of it, which is if there is an affiliation, the contract dictates
Correct.
the work that you do. I'm thinking.
Yes, you're correct. Yeah. That's a good question.
Although I'm sure we've now spawned a lot of curiosity for you, and you're probably gonna go look for the answers.
Yeah,
to the
I am.
question.
I like questions too that I can't answer sometimes. Provokes more thinking too. And I want to know those answers.
Any other questions from you? Yes.
So I know last year we were kind of focused, the folks that we ended up within our community were sort of from maybe 1 or 2 countries of origin. Are we still kind of, because I know that was a big lift for Maine Multicultural Center and a lot of organizations, is to make sure that schools, that healthcare facilities had the cultural background and information they needed to make sure that they were respectful of any cultural differences that they needed to be aware of. So are we still seeing folks, or are we to a point where now we're having to expand?
I think that's a really good question. So last year, where our folks are coming from, we had quite a few from the Middle East, some from South and Central and South America, and a couple from East and West Africa. Those are kind of our 4 regions of origin. And it seemed that tradition and trend was quite similar for this year as well. There's a bit more coming from Central and South America, which just more in percentage that I think has happened in the past year, probably because the process for getting refugee status is changing, maybe for what's coming from that country.
Venezuela specifically, by any chance?
Yep, yes, that's one of the countries, yeah. Quite a variety too. I'd say there's at least 5 country of origins probably in that region. But Venezuela as well. Kind of, I mean, refugee, it changes per, I guess, event per year, if you think about it, whatever happens, but yeah,
But when you think about a community who's trying to embrace 100 new Mainers,
right, if they're all coming from completely different.
if we're trying to, you know, it's a challenge to bring everybody up to speed
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. And
with
if you
100
start-
different
Yeah, and if
cultures.
you start, bringing in new cultures that
Correct.
haven't, that don't have a foothold in this
Right.
community at all, then it's definitely a challenge.
Which is a good,
And
and
making
in some
sure
way-
we're always ahead of that. if you
Yeah.
will.
I think that's good too, that it's kind of replicating what happened the past year as well, because you have now people that have lived here for a
Right,
year
Right.
that are,
There's some natural
Active-
supports
yeah,
that weren't here
Mm.
with
Which
the
is-
initial group.
good with, a new site. It's kind of the pros and cons. One of the pros, you get to create everything from scratch
Right.
and the process that you want and everything, but a con is you don't always have a community to support
Right.
that.
Right.
But also beautiful to see that developing,
Right.
people, oh, I met this family, I'm gonna show them how to use a bus. Awesome. I'm gonna show them how to buy groceries. Awesome, the natural support. But also brings up a good point too of kind of a cultural humility aspect of that, is applicable in, communities that are receiving refugees is hopefully relieve some of the burden. Yes, there's cultural aspect, specific parts for specific countries you have to be aware of, but also just the ability to go, I'm not gonna know.
Right.
I also don't, I have some folks that arrive and I don't know a lot about the countries that they're coming from. And that can be okay, but also being aware that there might not be things, so just kind of balance that. Oh, interaction. Oh, I hear maybe someone I didn't know wants halal food. They do want halal food. Okay. I'm not assuming that I know everything and just kind of being able to be wrong, I guess, with maybe people coming from countries or regions that you're not as familiar with. But I do realize that for a community, you have 50 different individuals from 50 different countries. It's kind of a bit of, that would be a lot to adjust to and trying to prepare and be on the up and up for that.
Do you know if part of the placement process is trying to place people in locations where communities, from those countries has been established that might help with that transition process?
A part of one way that they do that is through US ties. So when people are going through your settle, they can write down if they have someone in the US that they want to be connected to.
Mhm.
That's probably the best way that happens. I would say there's probably more planning on people above me and to make sure that we're not putting 50 people all from the same country in one place, but also not 50 people all from separate countries. So kind of trying to balance like new communities growth, but also making sure that there's community already there too.
Yeah. Any other questions? No? Great, thank you so much for sharing, and if there's any other updates, as always, we'd love to hear of them. And as a reminder for anyone else who doesn't remember the Maine Multicultural Center, you can go right on their webpage and sign up to be on their listserv to, if you want to be involved with any of the activities associated with your organizations and
I'll
their
probably
needs and things like that.
And I'll maybe plug them a bit too, that I guess 3 main things. One would be the time volunteer, if you have time to be a volunteer, either for a family specifically, or just kind of a one and done, help someone move in for one day. Furnishing volunteers, if you have pots, pans, tables, things like that, that's what the partnership of a refugee settlement site is like community and private, so kind of a lot of it is depending on the community. And then lastly, just kind of in-kind volunteers of a gift card to Hannaford's goes a long way, things like that. And we are hiring at Catholic Charities too, so if you know anyone that's interested as a case management specialist,
Oh, great. Good plug.
Good plug.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
We have nothing for policy this month, so we're gonna move right on to the subcommittee working groups. We have noted on here in January that, we, hope to have an update from Parks and Rec, and is that still on track to
Mhm.
happen? Awesome, so we can expect that. I'm not sure who wants to speak for the community events and education group. We had tasked you all with, looking at MLK Day events, things that we could potentially share, provide to the city council. Did you all have the opportunity to do that?
I didn't talk to nobody.
Okay,
Yeah, no, I'm sorry.
okay,
I wasn't here for that, please, I didn't.
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, I wasn't here at the last meeting either, but
So I do
Um,
believe there was a separate email from Debbie, to all of you. And I would say, one of the things we're trying to do with these subcommittees is to really, empower you all to take on some ownership in this. And that's why, I know for you, Thorne, you've already identified that email isn't.
Because I gave him your phone number.
Yeah.
I gave him your
Isn't
phone
the best
number.
mechanism.
yeah.
So I would say within your groups, if there's a better preferred mechanism for us to convey that to you, let us know so that we can get that to all of you. The goal for this was that we'd be able to have some, that maybe you've done some research in what other communities are doing or organizations, something that we could take to city council, something we could, help promote, things like that. So that really was what we were hoping to have come of that. One of the things that Katie and I have also looked at, and, we try to create a calendar every year of events. So we're trying to identify those events or those holidays or things in advance so we can have the lead-in time so that you can do the research and work as a group. Or if there's something as a group have identified, you think that would be important to bring forth. Again, we want you to, that's part of why we form these subcommittees, so that if that's where your passion and your interest is, that you're really kind of putting your, focus on that. So, you're more than welcome to, if you'd still like to convene as a group, to, look at that and bring that information forth. You can just email it to all of us. So I'll kind of leave that to you, and unless Debbie, there's something else you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, no, I think I'll share with you, I'm just gonna share what you all shared. I believe you had talked to, some members of, the school's DEIB committee. And what they talked about, because remember, this is still new.
Yeah.
And what they talked about is the subcommittees is
Okay.
really what worked to move forward,
Yes.
priorities of the committee.
Great.
So I think this past year, we've been trying to create the structure.
Yeah. Yeah, it was
To
Katie.
go forward and.
So it was Katie who had spoken to members of the school DEIB committee, and that's really what they said is they, what helps them push the thing forward to be proactive versus reactive is to allow the members to get to the subcommittees and really engage in the work that way and bring forth those ideas and those events and the education piece of it. So that's why I like to use the term empower. If that's where your passion is. If you don't think you have the time to commit to the subcommittee you've signed up for, that's okay too. We can always move you to something else if we want to, if we want to or whatever. But that's us trying to strike that balance of the proactive and reactive of this committee. Andre, you okay with it?
So, I brought this is, Northern Light puts together a calendar for employees, every year, and you were talking about the events calendar, and I
Yeah.
think you put that on a Google Docs
Last
document.
year's, yep.
And, there's a ton of stuff in here. If you look at it, over at the top of the month, you'll see the monthly things
Yeah.
that are
Yeah.
listed by the month. And then for each month, it has the holidays and it has, the national days of blah, blah, blah. And so if you want to incorporate some of that into the calendar that you've already created.
Yep.
Whatever's missing, and it includes all the different faiths. So if there's like a Buddhist holiday, it's included in there, and
Where was the calendar when I sat through and I was trying to review the
Oh.
city calendar? against that holiday?
it was sitting in my office.
Which is, did
Sorry.
Katie get that document to you?
No, I didn't see it.
Okay, I'll circle back with her on that. We went through the practice of going through January to June and looking at, we use a diversity calendar to compare
Mhm.
that against any other dates that there might be city meetings.
There's probably most of what you identified is already in there, but.
No, but this is
But
fabulous.
for ideas for the events
Yeah.
subgroup in the monthly stuff, like, I think February has like, it's like February is like National Women's Month, right? But it's also like Irish Americans Month. And I know we have a huge Irish community in, Irish folks, who descended folks in the city of Bangor, and so thinking that might be something interesting
Is it
to
possible to
look
get
into.
copies of this, more of these?
You know what I can do is I'll go ahead and scan the
Okay.
calendar pages and then just
Perfect.
send it out to everybody.
Yeah, and I want to hand this around so everyone can kind of take a peek. I think that is an excellent example of things that can be easily replicated and created, especially for like the city when we're looking at city meetings, instead of having two people sit down and pull up a diversity, calendar. and
Yeah,
say-
somebody in Northern Light did all this work already, so.
Yeah. Yeah, so when we went through it, the one thing I don't see on here that we had and this was under the holiday schedule, one of the things here is we listed like work restricted holidays, right? So that might be something not necessarily coded on here, but it might be work restricted, for, the holiday might happen this day, but the work restrictions observed on this particular
Mhm.
day, type thing.
And that's the particular, we ran into that concern.
Yeah.
I think 2 years ago.
Yes, yep,
Where we had a scheduled meeting. And there was an item on the agenda that was of interest. We had a number of individuals in the community where that was created
Yeah.
by attending the meeting was in conflict of their religion, and we're like.
Yeah, it was like Rosh Hashanah or something.
Right,
Yeah.
so we're like.
Yep.
We moved to reschedule the meeting.
Yeah.
But I'd like to be ahead of
Yeah.
those so that we're thoughtful of that.
we have it typed up. I'll make sure
Good.
Katie gets it to you, but if
Okay.
you're willing to scan.
Yeah,
that,
absolutely.
then
I'll
I
scan
think
all
it's a
the
fabulous
months and send it
example
to
of
everybody.
work that can be done. To me, this is like, it's lovely that someone else has done the work, why recreate the wheel if we can borrow some
Yeah,
ideas,
absolutely.
because it affects so many, and it's right at our fingertips to be able to view that information. So the subcommittee of human resources doesn't have anything on it and housing doesn't, but does any of those committees have any questions or anything, the subcommittees for those?
I did see something about, an article came out today about the Hope House, and it might
Mm.
not be functioning as of October of next year.
Yeah.
Does anyone have an update about that? Maybe you know?
Is that something we might get under the manager's update?
Yeah, I can put that under
Yeah.
manager update. Yep.
Because without that, we're losing a huge resource
Oh, I
for
know.
the city.
So we will circle back to that under number 8, because I figured Debbie, you would have an update.
Oh,
on
I
that.
know.
But again, empowering all of you in these
Right.
committees, like you're saying, you saw an article.
Yeah.
Raise the question up, bring it up if you want to get it on the agenda, because you want more information. Love that.
And
That's great.
I also, oh, sorry.
I was gonna say, but that reminds me is maybe it's a good kickoff is following. So I typically meet with the chair and the co-chair about 2 weeks out. And we kind of do this, but maybe that's also the moment that we throw out an email to all of the
Yeah.
members and say, hey. Has anything come up? Have you heard anything that we need to make sure that we're,
That you want brought in,
Right.
ears on,
Yeah.
eyes on. And then I'm not sure if it was brought to, can Evelyn serve on the subcommittee? Does that matter?
I don't believe it matters, but I also know that. Evelyn has fairly heavy skin.
So we can circle back on that, and also in the first meeting of the year, we'll go over everything new for, the committee and everything. So again, no pressure, nothing of the sort, but we do have subcommittees that, we identified these as areas of interest and people have, signed up for the areas that they're interested in. So if there's something you are interested in and you'd like to be part of it, I'm sure every group would love another person to be. So under the holiday schedule, Katie and I did do a city calendar and I will make sure that gets sent off. She was gonna make it pretty for you, Debbie. Yeah, I think that was, significant dates of consideration. I asked to have that on there, didn't I? Which was if there was anything that anyone else wanted. Like, that calendar we were talking about, we've identified different things. If there are other things that you would like to see on there that is coming up, like we know for Pride Month, we have the table. I'm assuming we would like to do that again. If there are any other things that in advance that you think would be good for the committee and you want to get it on there, we want to populate that in there so we can kind of pre-plan that stuff as much as we possibly can to, balance everything else. And again, that idea, if we can get the work a couple months in advance on the agenda to allow time, that's our goal, to help things run efficiently.
When you say a couple of months, do you mean 3 months, 6 months?
Whatever your heart desires.
Okay.
If you know now,
I was gonna say, the more notice, the better.
Yeah.
I mean, it can't hurt. And I think it'll roll out through the subcommittees.
Yep. All right, I think we've talked about subcommittees long enough. Nothing from the prior month agenda items or ordinance. Number seven under other business, the equity index, that's been on here for a couple of months, so
Yeah.
it's about time we finally get to it, I think.
And hang with me, we're all still zooming, nobody sees what I'm doing, I do this. The link is in the document, so instead of recreating the wheel, I'm gonna follow the link. So let me go back to Zoom, hang on. Let me do a screen share. Yes, I do know how to do this. Yeah. All right. So, I think several of you may have seen, this when it was released. It is put together, by, the Human Rights Campaign. They released, an equity index virtually, I'm assuming, for every community. And they grant it based on the state, county, and city level, and then the total points available. I believe that this ranking comes out sometime is updated perhaps in January, I think is the updating point. And I know the council chairs in the past have provided additional information to the group when they were compiling these. And I know our current chair obviously has interest as well. So I'm not quite sure how you want to roll through this, but in essence, as a city, from an employment, housing, and public accommodations, it appears that we are receiving, based on the state and the city scores, it looks to me like we're receiving 30 out of 30 points,
Great.
which is great.
What is this based on?
That's a good question. I have not,
Are they
I-
just basing it on like accessibility based on gender identity? Because it kind of seems like that's what they're making sure there's not
yes,
housing discrimination based on those
Correct.
things alone. Okay, well, it makes sense that we would have 30 out of 30 on that. We're not Florida.
yeah. So we have some flex points related to all gender single occupancy facilities, as well as protections for youth from conversion therapies. We also, as an employer, have points versus our non-discrimination, our transgender inclusive healthcare benefits, our city contractor non-discrimination ordinance, and our inclusive workplace. So this is giving us a score of 13 out of 28. And I believe what happens is it's based on information that they're pulling. Nobody calls and asks us anything.
Right.
They're going and pulling documents. And so part of the thought is how do we kind of drill down to look at particular areas where we're not scoring as well, and what do we need to do to try to address that? Because, for example, 0 out of 2 for an inclusive workplace is a problem. It's a problem for us as a community. It's a problem for us as an employer. So what is it that either they don't have for information, or what is it that needs to be included in our updated personnel rules and regulations, or what other steps may we need to look at?
Is there a guide that accompanies this so that you can see?
You gotta
what they're
go
looking
dig
at?
through everything. We just get the email link and says, oh.
Mhm.
Is there any way we can like confirm that that's how they hold the information, or is?
Yeah, I mean, and I guess that's kind of the thing is, if this is something that the committee wants to dig in, maybe this is
I
a
think you
good
would-
thing for the human relations, the
Mhm.
human resources
Mhm.
subcommittee to kind of start picking off.
Cause if it's like is it just like cause there's technology that can just scrape the
And I
website.
think that's what they do.
And I'd be really interested to learn like how.
Yep.
Those conclusions are made, and if there's some qualitative,
Yeah.
like, oh, yeah, I mean,
But to that point, even if they are scraping the website, that means if we have those policies, we're not saying it out loud.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Which is part of it. You're not gonna draw people in if you're not saying it
And
out
for
loud.
example, the second item, zero on transgender
Right.
inclusive healthcare benefit. It could be that we don't publish what our healthcare benefits are.
Correct.
Yeah.
And so zero just might mean we don't know,
And we should publish our healthcare benefits, honestly,
not
every,
necessarily. I mean, most organizations don't publish in detail what the medical plan is for the employee.
I was about to say that they should. Because a lot of employees, when they're looking at jobs, they want to know, what am I going to have for health insurance? And that's really important information for a lot of people when they are accepting a job in detail. They need to know what that is. So, I mean, that is a way that the city
Yeah,
could lead the way in the
I think-
community for
yeah, I
changing the
think
status quo.
Speaking from a human resources standpoint, I think it's a bad idea to publish that information publicly. If you're recruiting and you have a candidate for a position who has a specific medical issue that they want that information on, certainly you can give them that information. But to publish that information publicly, I think is not a best practice.
I think, the time I worked in HR, what I noticed was that it was about the same time that, domestic partner was really, had come to the forefront. And that was a big deal to publish that, because there were a lot of
Right.
people where
Right.
that was
Un-
important.
Right.
Understood,
Yeah.
but transgender inclusive healthcare benefits would be a little too far into the weeds of what specifically is covered under the medical policy.
See,
Other than saying, yes, we do cover domestic partners, or no, we don't cover domestic partners.
but I think this is generic enough to not be in the weeds, because to me, in the weeds is not saying it's an HMO, PPO, like, that's once you're getting specific. This is just saying transgender inclusive. You're not actually defining what
Right,
that
but so
looks
what
like.
what I would compare it to would be what kind of infertility benefits does our medical plan have? And that can range. You can't just say, yes, we have infertility benefits. People who are looking for infertility coverage want to know, do you offer IVF? How many treatments of IVF can I get under the insurance policy? And you don't want to publish that kind of information.
So it would seem to me,
I'd also argue that as an employee, you may not want to have those conversations with your potential employer.
So I will share that what we do as an employer, for example, when we go through the process, a hiring process. And a common question is, what do you all offer for health benefits? So we send the whole matrix
Mhm.
so that it does get to.
Right, but you don't publish it on the company,
Correct,
on the city
but
website.
So that the individual doesn't have to ask.
Right,
The HR
it's not a
person.
secret document.
Correct.
Anybody who's an employee gets the full
Right.
summary
Right.
plan description
right,
of the plan. And if you're a candidate, we can send that to you as well. But to publish it on a website, I think is not a best practice.
there must be a reason, however, that they're putting that there.
Right, because they probably don't have the information one way or the other.
Well, no, I mean, as this entity that has published, that has this out there is a reason why they're there, they are including that on there, right? It's not just, hey, this feels like a good question to ask. There is a reason why they're asking that question. And I think that's maybe, like, what are they really trying to get to in that particular, with that question,
And so I'm gonna say that there are, depending on the healthcare plan, let's say. So there are healthcare plans that are sponsored by organizations that, based on the organization's belief, don't cover perhaps individuals, perhaps prescriptions, perhaps procedures that others would.
Can you scroll down a little bit more?
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I have and that could be what this question is trying
Mhm.
to get to as well.
And go ahead and then, oh, sorry, I just want to make sure we're getting everyone.
Just two thoughts. One is if there's an opportunity, I'd love to be part of whatever team digs into this. I think this is really, really
Team dig.
interesting from,
Same here.
There's-
Yeah, as well.
Yeah.
We
All
would
right.
volunteer
Data.
to help for the human resources.
well, maybe.
Yes, you
Um,
did.
There's about, just from my academic brain is going off here, there's about 20 questions behind all of this, but, and one of the questions I have is for Debbie is like, what's the consequences? So we have this index and it's just one index amongst many. And so is this like for the committee's benefit? Like, hey, we're looking at some data, we're trying to make improvements, or is this something that, say, other communities in Maine are sort of expected to announce or broadcast or publish? Is it a conversation that's happening? Is there like, are there consequences and costs? Let's say if transgender inclusive healthcare benefits is a zero, and what I can say from that, knowing that one of the most progressive nonprofits in Bangor currently does not have transgender inclusive healthcare benefits, and it's strictly increase in premium issue. And it's a major thing, like we're trying to find money for that right now. And so like there's a much bigger story to this as well. And that's certainly something that's not, oh, it's a zero, you
Right.
must not be.
And I think that's probably more, so you don't hear municipalities talking about it. We just get the email blast that here's your rating, and we're like, wait a minute. You haven't even talked to us. But what I do think is I think it sends a message, as you say, without the data, without understanding sort of what the survey is trying to measure, it sends an unintended message. Does it say to you as an employer that the city of Bangor, is not an inclusive workplace? And I think by having a zero there, without that background information, it perhaps relays that information, and that's not what we want to do.
Like, does this bring up a conversation in Augusta,
Correct.
Yeah, and this is something that I think that whoever the team that I'm also volunteering myself for that looks into this is kind of what are they looking for? And like, if it's just on one document, like to
Right.
kind of uncover more, because for instance, also above that, the non-discrimination in city of employment, you see on city, it has two, one for sexual orientation, one for gender identity. Sexual orientation is 7, gender identity is 0. And maybe that's just wording things not being updated that it should
Correct.
be including gender identity and expression as well. But just kind of seeing, yeah, I
Yeah.
think seeing what the criteria they're based on would be interesting and knowing which ways that
Right.
is.
I smell a subcommittee work.
I think as we're scrolling through this, I think one of the things to remember, this is the Human Rights Commission, and when we're asking the question of who's looking at this is an organization that's well-respected and looked at, and I do think, at least if I remember correctly, a lot of human resources, this is something that a lot of human resources offices look at, to this information to see, and I do know people look at it. This is something that they look at. So I do think it is a worthwhile task that we do
Okay.
analyze. Why is that question there? What are we doing?
And what my takeaway from this conversation is that we'll have a group that's gonna look specifically at those two questions within that municipality as an employer.
Do we want to break this out as its own actual temporary subcommittee type thing, in case there's not
Whatever.
everyone on
Yeah.
it?
All right,
That works.
okay.
I'm also wondering, sorry, so like the Human Rights Campaign, of course, is a very, very large, very well-funded, very powerful organization. And my hunch is that there are other sort of indexes that are pulling the data from this, right? And
Right.
so like there might potentially be other publications, other, let's say, brand impressions of Bangor, right, that might be drawn from additional websites, organizations that pull from this.
Right.
And so I'd want to know, like, how is this nested within other?
How is it distributed and how does it impact others?
Correct. And I think that's a very nebulous thing.
And if when this subcommittee gets together, if you were to go to the homepage of the municipalities,
Yeah.
where it sells, it's gonna tell you, it's gonna break it down, how they got their data, who they were working with, or maybe at the bottom of the page, I'm not sure. Because usually they're gonna go to the lengths of saying who, the how, the
Mm.
why. It's like you're saying, this is a well-known group well-funded, you know. But who was it who wanted to join this
So
particular?
I heard
subcommittee?
Jason, Rebecca and Gabrielle
And
okay.
Melissa?
And Melissa.
and Melissa. Oh, it's a four.
Could you scroll down,
Yeah.
just so we can keep seeing the categories?
So for
Cool,
flex
data
points. So we have flex points
We're all data
related
monsters.
to
Yeah.
domestic partner benefits, Human Rights Commission, enforcement mechanism and Human Rights Commission,
Interesting.
and LGBTQ plus liaison in city's executive's office. So, you know, I wonder how this committee in its work and its lens could be reflected in this.
But to that point is a discussion that has been going on for a while, which is there really should be a DEI person for the city,
Yeah.
you know,
Understood.
and this just reemphasizes
Yeah.
that call.
Someone to be our mouthpiece.
What else do they have on there?
So we've got some additional, so youth bullying, so a lot of this feels like so this feels, I don't know if it's for city services. So I'm not sure if they're talking about education
There must be. a
or if they're
document.
talking about Parks and Rec. I mean, because we do a lot,
It sounds like they're just talking about whether there's a policy or not.
Right.
On bullying.
right? Services to supports, to LGBTQ plus youth. People experiencing homelessness, older adults. And I think what happens is, as I sit and look through some of these questions in a little bit more detail, so lots of times what I will share is, for example, when organizations are comparing communities to communities, there isn't always a distinction in size
Mhm.
and what happens in your community. So for example, I will say that we have, I'm not as familiar with what additional services and support exist specifically to the LGBTQ plus community, as it relates to homelessness or older adults or youth. But I know it just so happened the executive director of Heal was in to see me today. So I do know that we have a significant service provider in our community to support people living with HIV or AIDS. Because that was the root of what the organization began, but it's expanded beyond that.
What they're saying is
So
we're
it's
not
not
advertising.
Right,
We're not
but
saying it out.
But it's also not provided by the city per se.
Right.
Yeah,
So it.
I
it's
mean,
not
we
that
need
the-
to delve into
Yeah,
what the parameters are, but city shouldn't necessarily mean
correct.
the
And is it
city of Bangor. You know,
Proper.
the
Yeah, I think
proper.
they're thinking
It
like
should-
our
you
public
know, it
health
should be
department.
correct?
What, are there organizations or
Aren't these-
services in the city?
That's correct.
To the
That
point, is the
provide
city
those.
providing the information to the service?
Correct, and I
Yeah.
think that's
City
kind of weird.
like doing it.
Right,
Yeah.
so it's basically perhaps a link to resources on our webpage, is in our public health page.
Question is there a
Yeah.
guiding
Where we're not
document for
gonna
this?
talk
I
Correct.
also think that this indicates that we need to be investing in our Bangor Public Health Department, period, and like expanding on what they offer. I know that they're already like doing that, but if it would mean that, this can't be the only list of indicators
Right.
that we are lacking. There's got to be others out there too, that don't just focus on LGBTQ plus issues.
Correct.
They also might look at issues like housing and homelessness and addiction and things that we are actively working on, but we could be doing a lot more on. And, expanding what our city does in terms of our public health and advertising, not just what our city is doing, but also, you know, the fact that, when you go back up and you're looking at the transgender health issue.
Right,
We have Mabel Wadsworth.
Right.
And they do a ton, but unless you live here, like I've got neighbors who they moved here a couple months ago. They didn't know about Mabel until I told them.
Right.
And they had no idea where to go. They went to Eastern Maine. They were trying to get a primary care provider. They were not being heard. They were not being seen. And, it took them a long time to find the resources that they needed. So there are ways that we could be cutting this out and making it easier for people.
So one thing, just because I want to be able to finish up the meeting in a timely fashion and everything, we created our subcommittee. I think one of the things that I'm also thinking as we're going through this is, as we're doing our website revamp,
Yes.
how this can be a great, jumping off
Mhm.
point to make sure we are putting that information on there and using this kind of as a checkbox of those things, and use a very similar template for the other topics that are coming up.
Yeah.
Of all the things that we talk about, this could be just a really good guide.
And we'll share too, one of the pieces that we're looking at is currently right now, we have a Parks and Rec website, we have a city
Mhm.
website, we have a public health website. And we're looking to fully integrating those because one stop,
Yeah. And the other thing
And-
is too,
ask your question.
HIV and AIDS, like, we could direct people where to go for those
Correct.
services. Like, I know Eastern Maine, they have primary offices that
Correct.
offer that service, but there's only a handful of providers that
That's correct.
do.
Is that something that you guys are like on the website revamp? Are you planning on including more resources? Like, moving to Bangor, you're like, I don't know what's in Bangor. Like, if I'm an LGBTQ person, how do I know what support services are available without? Like, is that something that is planned on like the website?
So right now, we just need to get it into the current century. It's very dated. So at this point, we're really concerned about recreating the back end and then expanding. But I think making sure that we're incorporating information that's relevant. I can tell you that, public health, they don't always, they just revamped theirs because it still had everything COVID on it. And while COVID is still here, the resources have become dated, so it needs to, so we have two people sort of doing, a person and a half, if you will, doing communications in our office now. We're gonna try to drive that and start building out. So I do think all bets are off. I also kind of wonder at times, so a lot of the state, last week during the windstorm, for example, everybody was pushing it to 211. I went on 211. I had a hard time finding it. Because nobody thinks about. Everybody's just happy to say, here's the resource. That's great.
Right.
So I went on and I'm like, all right, let me go to the webpage and see what it's gonna tell me. It wasn't easy for me to tell me anything. And there's no banner that says,
Click here.
correct. I mean, this is an emerging, and how does 211 fit into this? I mean, we can't all be everything. So how do we align the resources and make sure that we're all rowing in the same direction? That's always been the struggle.
Can I add just one more small thing on
Yeah.
that? And I think this is like a much more interesting and complex conversation once the working group gets started, but and I think maybe this is to your point, Gabrielle, this is one powerful organization, right? And then there's certainly very specific items here.
Right.
So it's attached to an agenda and one we, I think collectively pretty much agree with, right?
Right.
But there is a power dynamic here and that power is exercised through the specific language that they use, right? And if this is the only index that, let's say, cities in Maine are using to then communicate or express, let's say, diversity, et cetera, then I think that's something we need to look at. What other indexes out there could we also use that could provide a more holistic
Yeah.
perspective? Like, this is a very specific lens, but is there a generalized city index? Is there an alternative
Right.
Yeah.
sort of index related
Right.
to even LGBTQ plus issues that's from a different organization?
Right.
Because then not all LGBTQ plus organizations like the Human Rights Campaign.
Right.
And there's very specific reasons for that. So,
Oh, that's good insight.
So,
Yeah.
subcommittee, you know who your members are. We'll leave it to you all to gather, start the process looking at things, and maybe Debbie, it might be worthwhile letting whomever's kind of doing the website work know that this is stuff that we're kind of taking on and might have some suggestions and ideas coming down the pipeline as that website's getting built, or things that we
It
can
isn't
even do
being
now.
built yet,
Yeah.
so we have time.
Yeah, or things that we can do even
Correct.
now to
Correct.
get out there.
Yeah.
And for the same committee, who does the best places to work in Maine? Who does that actual,
The Chamber of Commerce.
for the state of Maine? I'm just throwing it out there. That could be another,
So I'm actually on a board that now refuses to participate in that survey
interesting.
because they found that what they did by their own internal employment practices has led to greater retention and buy-in and respect from the employees of the board.
Mhm.
And it was actually at a board meeting 2 weeks ago, and they said, we're not doing that anymore.
It is
We-
a lot of work.
We did what we felt was best for our organization, for our employees. And to wave the banner, it just wasn't worth it. They just felt that their efforts were better directed
Yeah,
in other
I
ways.
know that Northern Light used to participate years ago, but I don't think they participated in it just because the application process is so onerous.
So just,
Yeah,
when we're
but-
talking about, you're talking about different indexes and things
Yeah.
that are being used to look at, just throwing ideas out there, but, that is yours, subcommittee, have at it. The second item under other business is
Hang on, I
the,
gotta stop sharing here.
Okay.
That's been a lot.
my apologies. Everyone has received a copy of the draft annual reports that may be for you two who came in late.
You need a break, after a couple.
We can share for a moment,
Perfect.
but I would like to make a recommendation that, I haven't looked at this. So if we could take this away as homework and get back to you.
Absolutely.
So when is it that we need to present this to the,
According to the
City.
agenda, it says February 5th. Is that when we're actually presenting it, or that's when?
being submitted or?
That's so, based on the timeline, the thought was that if you got to a place where you were able to approve your final report, we could then turn around to the Government Operations Committee on the February 5th meeting.
And I believe that's probably very doable, given that our January meeting will be, what, the 23rd? Is that right?
Okay, I'm gonna do the math.
Are we having it on,
It's the 24th, right?
we meet on,
It's on, wait a minute,
we
meet on
do
Tuesday?
Tuesdays.
it's on
Oh, today
Tuesdays.
just a
We're just on
Thursday.
Thursday because of the holiday.
Yeah,
Right.
oh, I was wondering. Yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
nobody wanted to come in the day after, 'cause
Yeah, I
Yeah,
kind of thought it was
so-
weird. I was like, are we really having this? And I looked at my calendar, I was like, oh, weird.
Yeah, so
Okay.
I just move that we take this away
Okay.
as homework. And then, because I suspect it's perfectly fine the way it is, but I don't want to
Yeah.
take the time to read it during the meeting. And then just present any comments at the next meeting.
So just so everyone knows, what Katie and I did is we went through all of our meeting minutes, we reviewed what was on our agenda, things that we did, so we tried to talk about our accomplishments, the things that we reviewed, the activities we started, and kind of the goals, what we want to do going into next year. So if there's anything on there you feel that we did or reviewed that's not on there, let us know. I suggested maybe we actually list the number of pages of things that we've read over time. I was like, but I'm not gonna sit down and count all those pages. But yeah, please feel free to go through if you want to go back to the meeting, some things that, we discussed. I do think that gives us plenty of time for
Yeah.
the next meeting to review. But we were ahead of it and we did get it done, so that was the goal this time around. Okay, we're gonna move on to manager updates, so I'm gonna turn it over to you, Debbie.
Sure. So as we're talking sort of the housekeeping in next meeting, a couple of points for the next meeting, obviously with our new members coming on, so I know too, I believe, Catherine Robinson is a new member
Mhm.
and had said, looks forward to joining us in January, so I knew.
Yeah.
We have shared sort of the documents as to how the committee came to be, the background, with the new members. Obviously, it'll be the first meeting of the new committee. You're gonna have to do your FOIA training, because that's fun. You'll also amongst yourselves talk about selecting a chair and a co-chair for the coming year. So that will be on your agenda. Your city manager will be on vacation. She's flying back that night at like midnight. So you will have Courtney with you that night. So that's kind of the January meeting. I'm not sure, and I haven't asked, and perhaps I'm about to offer somebody up before I'd ask for it, but, if we're gonna make January sort of accessibility month, maybe, I know you and I sat through Council Chair Pelletier's presentation
Mhm.
through Northern Light, maybe she
Yeah.
could do an abbreviated
That would be wonderful.
version, because for those of you who haven't
Mm.
heard her speak to that, it's really interesting, because and what really made me think about it is when Melissa was talking about it's okay not to know with a culture, and that was very much her message. It's okay not to know, and it's okay to ask. And so I think, sort of removing the discomfort that people may feel from saying, I don't know what the right thing to say is, I don't know what the right thing to do is. I thought it was a great lesson.
Mhm.
Other manager updates, January 23rd, I believe, is the point in time count. So point in time count is, a requirement from the Department of Housing and Urban Development. And they pick this day in January where they task community members to go out at sunset and count, the individuals who are unhoused. It takes place across the nation on the same day every year. And what they use is the data, then there are 2 or 3 days afterwards where they're doing additional work. So there is an opportunity to volunteer if you'd like to. I'm happy to send that along to you also, that if it's something you want to look at and you're interested in. And what HUD uses is the data that's collected is used to determine policy and funding. So it's really important that accurate counts. We always have a really good turnout here in the city. So I'll be sending that stuff along to you too. Since we're talking about, unhoused individuals, let's talk about Hope House. So, so I have talked to the executive director of the Hope House, and I have another meeting before I go on vacation, because I said I'd really like to talk to you and see how these conversations are happening before I leave town. So they made it very clear that they are looking to find an organization to take over operating the Hope House. They had identified a couple of potential partners that they were working with. The partners were, organizations that are well, trained, understand the work, would be able to take over an operation like this. So part of my conversation with her in early January will be, how are those conversations going? I will also share, I think it was a clear message to the state legislature. They have not increased shelter funding in this state for decades. Shelters are underfunded, and shelters are not the only answer, but they are certainly part of the answer. And to fail to fund them is a problem. Only Bangor and Portland actually pay for shelter beds as communities. So we issue general assistance. If there's a shelter bed in our community and there's an individual in it, we pay general assistance for that shelter bed to the shelter. And Bangor and Portland are the only 2 communities, to my understanding, that do that. And it's interesting because, shelters are done on a regional basis. I don't know if you saw the article, I think Lloyd may have referenced. Every community in the state has to pay for animal control. They don't have to pay to address homelessness services.
Fascinating.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
So I think part of this too, I know that the shelters have been lobbying the legislature to increase the funding. And at some point, you gotta throw it out there. I will say that one of the first questions they asked me before they went public, the city committed $2.5 million to renovating the shelter, the Hope House shelter. And their question was, does that money go away? And my response was, the council will continue to support this. They understand it's a necessary resource. But if you're asking me today, if we would write you a check today for $2.5 million, the answer to that is no, because if October, you're not here. But the way the agreements are written, those ARPA awards are assignable. Council remains committed, understands the value that having a low barrier shelter represents in our community, and that it is one of the pieces to address the needs in our community. So we're gonna continue to have conversations to make sure, I believe I would hope the state of Maine got the message. That's the update on Hope House.
Do you know if the organizations that they've been in communication with, local, national, state, a mix? Don't know.
I know of the organization, so I know enough to know that they're within our region. And like I said, well thought of, well run. You know, you're not gonna, you can Google anybody and come up with something bad, but nothing that created concern at this point. But that was just one. So I'm just kind of curious who else the partners have. Have there been any conversation of this with, any of the state legislative or the administration to say, what you gonna do? And be thoughtful that, you know, the new legislative session, the second, regular session starts next Wednesday. So we'll see what happens in that session. So update on city council priorities for the coming year. So the city council had their first workshop December 12th, I believe, do sort of a brainstorming session on what do you want to do? What do you want to set for priorities for the coming year? And what do you want to do, with the balance of your ARPA funds? Kind of provide some, let's have that initial conversation. So that first brainstorming session came away with, and we followed it up last night. We had a discussion about that. So the council has determined that they are going to have housing as their only priority this year. And I do think it makes a great deal of sense. I think housing always has a piece of a priority in the year, but lots of times our priorities are pretty broad and not something you make progress on it, but it's hard in 10 months to say, we have done this. So looking at being thoughtful about housing and how it will impact. And as far as their ARPA, the balance of the ARPA funds, they still are looking to finalize 2 or 3 more potential partnerships with Penobscot County, because I think by us leveraging funds with other communities to meet a regional need is important. So we had an initial meeting last week with Penobscot County about sort of the last 4 that we're talking about, 2 that the city has asked for, 2 that the Penobscot County Commissioners have asked for. Beyond that, they are, we're coming back, and actually next week we're having a discussion about public bathrooms. So public bathrooms, and then the balance of the funds for housing. Housing can take a couple of, we're not committed to one tract of housing, but for example, the city owns a couple of parcels that could be developed for housing. So we've talked to them about, do we just put in all of the infrastructure? Do we put in the roads, the sewer, the water, and the electric, and buy it down enough so that we're able to say, we're gonna take this and lower the development costs, and here's what you're gonna do in return. You're gonna build X, because that's what we wanted, and not have a developer come in, buy their own property and decide what they wanna build, and that's okay. But we've gotta have everything. The other thing we talked about is we actually have, for example, we have a pump station out by the Bangor Mall. There's a pinch point right now. And we know that out beyond sort of, if you think about that Stillwater Avenue area, there's larger parcels of vacant property that could potentially become housing, because we changed our zoning to allow for housing in this type of zoning district. But we know that if that ever built out, we're gonna have a pinch point. So do we make that investment now to make sure that when that development comes along, that we're prepared from an infrastructure perspective to be able to handle it? So those are the kinds of things we're looking at.
I was fascinated to read, I think it was an article in the Bangor Daily in the last few days, about distressed properties and how Bangor has done a fantastic job dealing with distressed properties in the last, from over 200 to like, what, 30 or something like that, distressed properties left or something like that in the city of
It was-
Bangor.
we're
26, actually, yeah.
Coming in with the.
We're
stats.
working
Yeah.
on it, and, you know, and.
Well, I
But
mean.
some of that too, so, well, I'm glad that somebody's gonna give us credit for something. I'm all about that, but I'll also say the real estate market drove
Mm.
that. So there were some market forces at play, with a number of people who
Right, but-
just,
Right,
but I'll
I mean,
take it
but you look-
however it goes.
But if you look at Waterville, I mean, the real estate market's not that different in Waterville, and they still have a ton of
Yep.
distressed properties, according to
Yep.
this article.
Oh, okay,
So,
good. So progress, and we actually have taken possession of 4 properties from matured tax liens.
Good.
We hadn't done for a while, and now we'll be able to assess them and determine, okay, can this be renovated? Does it need to be torn down? If it can be renovated, should we renovate it with our own federal money? And then offer it to a qualified homeowner? Is this an opportunity to work with a Habitat for Humanity? Is this a good project for them?
mhm.
Or is this a good project to just say, you know, hey, is it an equity process for a young family or for an older, for whoever, for any resident? I mean, there are people who like
Is
to do
is there a
things.
possibility to, I mean, if it's a single family
Yeah.
home now,
Yeah.
is there the option to turn it into a duplex or a triplex?
So,
Depending on the zoning, I
yes.
guess? Yeah.
yeah, so that's part of the zoning changes we made in relation to the state's LD 2003. So even if you're in a single family, I'm gonna get it wrong, so I'm gonna stop. But even in a single family residence, you could add additional dwellings. The other thing we're doing, so for example, in the next month, we're opening bids on pre-approved building plans. So we're gonna hire an architect, engineer to draw building plans. Back in the 1900s, everybody built what's referred to as the Bangor box.
Mhm.
That was sort of the standard house plan.
Mhm.
So we're gonna do sort of a Bangor multi-unit. We're gonna do a Bangor ADU, and we're gonna pay for the plans.
Mm.
And they're all gonna be approved, and they're all gonna be pre-permitted, and you're gonna be able to walk in, and we're gonna hand you a set of plans.
Mm.
And
One of
say,
the-
here,
one of
if
the
you'd like
things
to
that
do
I-
this, build this.
Yeah, one of the things I've noticed in Bangor, compared to other cities is that, Bangor's very few or very little in terms of like multi-unit owned properties, like condos and townhouses and
Mhm.
stuff like that. I mean,
Mhm.
there's, Orchard Hills, and then, of
Mhm.
course, I lived in Franklin Place. But I mean, there's very few and far
Yeah.
between places where you can own that are condos or,
Mhm.
you know. that's-
The plan is referred to that as attached residential.
Just attached residential, okay.
And another thing that the city could also be doing, there was an
Yeah.
article, I think it was actually in the BDN again, about what Lewiston is doing about starter homes. And
Yeah,
that is something the city should absolutely be
Yep.
looking at, because it's becoming very difficult for young families to start buying a home because costs are so high. So,
For young families.
yeah, not even young families.
No.
And, it should be, you can buy a single family home for under $150,000.
I don't, we would.
Yeah, and if
Right.
that means that that is getting subsidized by the city and we're getting state funding or federal funding, whatever we have to do, we need to make that happen because we need those young people here.
I also want to make the note that the city does have like a first-time home buyers assistant
right.
program. And it is still currently being worked on. I was talking to Robin.
Yeah.
And anyone who has an interest, I'm on her mailing list of like, does this work? Or am I just overthinking this?
And that's great, but good luck finding a
actual
single family
property.
home
Well,
for
I will-
$150,000.
I will say to this, as someone
Right.
who's been through that process for almost a year. One of the things that they did do towards the end of the year is they did increase the amount that they are willing to cover in recognition of the fact that these home prices have gone up significantly.
Right.
So they have increased the allotment of the funding.
Right.
But to that point, you still have
Correct.
to find a home
Correct.
at that level, and
Correct.
there are some appearing there. But I think the eye-opening thing for me was when I was doing the report out
Right.
last year at Government Ops, and I was listening to the tax assessor talk about the prediction for the city of Bangor
Oh,
for
yeah.
the coming year. And I will be listening to
Yeah.
that person as well, and they gave the projection that they didn't think the prices were gonna come down. Yes, the discussion is what are the taxes gonna be, but what is the value of homes gonna look like? How long will they stay at this? Who's moving in? And I think the thing that we have heard repeatedly in these meetings, is that missing middle class.
Correct.
that middle group.
Yeah.
Correct.
It is my
Right.
hope that anything that
And
the
I-
city does is looking at that right there.
And I think that's kind of our wheelhouse. I mean,
Yeah.
if nobody else is gonna pick it up, there is no subsidy for that segment of
Mhm.
housing. So, to me, that's our opportunity.
What about other properties? I think it used to be the YW.
So Penobscot County owns that,
Oh, not Bangor.
not Bangor.
Interesting.
Penobscot County owns that.
And that was a closed bid process, right?
When they bought it,
Well, because it didn't go to bid to see who would.
yeah,
but
nobody
this
bought
was,
it.
um,
Nobody bought it. They still own it. I believe they perhaps may be considered, there was, I think, some concerns about, the materials and the disposal cost. So I think they may look at something like that. Just my guess.
It's just when you look at those properties, we're all talking about these properties in these places, that was, I think, a potential lost opportunity.
I
You know, to
agree.
provide downtown housing. You know, where can we do that? What can we do to the Bangor Mall to make it more community centered? You know,
Correct.
all those things.
Well, we're still on housing too. So there were 2 applications put into Main State Housing for projects in Bangor related to what's referred to as the 9% low income tax credit housing. It's very competitive. So Penquist put in for its family housing on Milford Street. And Bangor Housing put in for its senior housing on Sunset Avenue. The Penquist project has been approved by Misha. So that project will get the low income tax credit funding. I've talked to Bangor Housing and they're gonna put in for, the next round, which is a 4% tax credit. So they're committed. So
That one on Milford, was that the one that was a 3-year window to get up online?
Yep. Yep. So those 2 got that funding. Or one got funding and they're moving on to the other one. The other, I think, hot topic is Versant. At least it's my hot topic.
What's my hot topic too?
So last week, really didn't go as anybody had planned, or anticipated, based on what they're, chatting about. We had we do have some connection to Versant. It was really difficult to get information out of them. We had to push and prod, and we've talked about the fact that what they were sharing publicly was not helpful. They have been open to having a debrief with us. And so they're doing their own internal debrief. But they're open, and it's, the emergency manager for the city is actually the fire chief. So the fire chief and I will actually be likely speaking to Versant early on and talking about, what did you all learn? Because step back and, it's not for us, but in your own debrief, what did you learn? What could have gone better? What didn't go better? Where's the disconnects? And as the week went on, what we found is, we were perhaps not all that friendly at times. But we advocated because we know our community. And we know where the pinch points are, we know where the problems are. And he and I are both, he's like, I'm on this area, and I'm like, I'm over here, and because I don't think the communication went there to the public, and it's a problem.
Well, it is a problem because people need to plan, need to know
That's
what to
correct.
do.
That's correct.
You know,
Yeah.
if
And
their
if you're
power's gonna
not-
be out for 2 days,
Correct.
it's a different plan than if your power's gonna be out for a week.
That's correct.
And also where we live in a city that is a lot of rental units and landlords are not interested in installing generators or taking those additional precautions, the onus is then on renters who are paycheck to paycheck. That's not something that they are really prepared to experience. And that's part of why they live in a city, is because you would
That's correct.
expect to not have a week-long power outage.
Well, and I knew at least a couple or 3 people that, once it got to a certain point, they're like, well, I'm just gonna book a hotel room.
Right.
And then, they go to the hotel room, their power turns on.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so it was,
We had the same thing, so. And
I think
then
the question is, what was the logic they were using?
correct.
And then once you look at the logic they were using, what does that actually look like when you sit down and look at who lives in those particular regions? To your point, night 2, I went to go book a hotel. two things happened. One, sold out, but two, like Booking.com was still booking rooms for places that had no power.
Right.
So that became a secondary issue, right? And then we talked about where Versant was or wasn't communicating information. And I don't think I saw anything about a warming station at least until 2 days later. You know, I think we all feel very fortunate that it wasn't cold,
Yeah.
you know, with a snowstorm or ice storm.
But there were a lot of elderly people
Right.
who were struggling.
You know, that review process, you
Right.
know, that's.
And that's
the
what
whole
we
thing.
kept saying, is I just need to know where you're gonna be. We need to make alternate plans. But we can't make alternate plans not knowing what your work is.
Mhm.
And I get it. So I'm gonna be, it's not, in order to get power into a community, it's not just turning it back on here. It is having to repair all the damage on the transmission lines.
Yeah.
I said, that's fine, but you need to tell people.
It's also organizing the teams to do the repairs, which I found out from, I found out from linemen that work for Versant, that they did not have that plan in advance.
Understood. I've
Yeah.
heard that some places.
Yeah, that's a problem. They need to straighten that
So
out.
they need to have their own internal debrief. And then let's talk about what's gonna be different, what did you learn, because, and we'll provide some feedback, so. But, it was good. I mean, it wasn't
The
good,
event wasn't good.
no, but it's an opportunity and we're not gonna let the opportunity go by.
Yeah.
So that's the last of it.
I would have to say that we had behind us on Essex, where I live, we had several power poles go down. And living on the West Coast, I was not expecting to get, like, if you call in, I was expecting a voicemail, like, yeah, we'll get to you, you're a number, blah, blah, blah. I was gladly surprised that a human person actually picked up the phone and said, oh yeah, we know what's happening, we're just not gonna be there for a while. I'm like, okay, at least that's somewhat of an answer.
Yeah. So I think part of the question I would have as maybe a later conversation, is I know
Mhm.
we've kind of created this, I think, kind of a landlord tenant type thing, right? Which is not to say that tenant, to what you're saying.
Right.
Which is what onuses are on landlords to provide some sort of communication or preparation, what can the city do to maybe help them or incentivize them for some of those things?
Yeah.
What kind of conversations can happen around that? Because with climate change
Mhm.
and just living in the region we are,
These things are gonna happen
Yeah.
more often. I mean,
how
this
can
is
we
not gonna be
Yeah.
a once in a blue moon event. It's gonna be more and more frequent. Absolutely.
So how
Well, it's
can we
every 4 or
help them?
5 years at this point.
I just heard a meteorologist say, that, people think, oh, it's been several years. He goes, I don't know, it was actually a year ago when it was either tropical storm or a hurricane came through. They said it was actually just a year ago that we had a similar event.
Yeah.
And they expect it to be more frequent. So how can we help those conversations, given the makeup of our area? So, I have nothing else on the agenda. Are there any other announcements or anything that anyone would like to bring up before we end the meeting? Because we are 1 minute over.
I don't have anything.
I want to thank everyone for your commitment to this committee this year and the work that we're doing. And I look forward to working with you next year and really being proactive, addressing city needs, and making ourselves more visible in this community. And I know that's something I'm very much committed to, is making sure that when they think of something happening, that they are also thinking of us, not just city council, but other groups in Bangor, not just city groups, but just groups in the region. And, if that's an organized campaign on our part, going to things, something to that effect, I think that helps us, it helps the city, it helps us. And that's something I'm committed to after spending a year committed to helping, refine our agenda. And I just appreciate every single one of you and what you've brought forth and the great work. And I hope everyone had a good holiday and that you bring in the new year safely. And I look forward to seeing you in the new year.
And thank
With
you
that
for
said-
your leadership and your
Dedication.
dedication.
You're-
No, please, no.
This is
And
me.
keeping us corral, keeping us corral.
I'm not
thank you.
editing the meeting.
And thank you for Debbie.
Yes.
Thank you, Debbie, for your support as well. So, this is a good group and I think we're doing good work. So,
It's not easy work, that is for sure.
I raised my hand for this group because I told the city council that I want to learn how things run in Bangor.
Nice.
And I believe that I've chosen the right community to work with that's doing a lot of the heavy lifting on some important things.
We're excited to have you join us and,
Yes.
Yep.
and join in the heavy lifting. With that being said, can I get a motion to end the meeting?
I motion to end the meeting.
I second.
Meeting's adjourned. Thank you, everyone.